has been too long. Allow me to act.
Welcome everyone. As you may have heard earlier in the week, the Revenant Elite Specialization, the last one we would have expected, was revealed to us first in a teaser, then in a third-party article on Wednesday, then an official article from ArenaNet on Thursday, and finally, the live stream today. I'm going to talk to you guys about the live stream, show off some real Herald gameplay for you, and talk about the way the spec works. They did do a complete reveal. It's crazy to me, actually. Watching this, the first time, I felt almost fatigued taking the information down. I cannot imagine how the balance team feels right now. It feels like we've gone through so many of these at this point, and we haven't seen a single medium armor elite specialization to this day. How crazy is that? So let's look at the Herald. Let's see what Glint brings to the table. But first, and I will try to go fast through this, Roy has been incredibly active on the forums, like super active, trying to tune the Revenant just right. Explain to us what its downsides are supposed to be, namely Condi Cleanse, and where it's supposed to be strong, where some of its trees seem diluted or weren't making much sense, and bug fixing, bug fixing, bug fixing. So lots of changes will be made to the Revenant next time we get to play it on the next beta. Next beta, they did confirm Herald will be available and underwater combat. So let's look at the generic changes. First of all, Sword. I felt this a lot when I was playing Revenant in the previous beta weekend event. Sword felt lackluster. Specifically, the skill 3 felt lackluster, as well as very squishy. There's been a lot of discussion on whether the Sword 3, which is the one that teleports you all over the place, is supposed to be doing tons of damage, and it's a high damage spike if there's only one target in front of you. This was getting a lot of Revenants killed while they used it, and I kind of liked that that was the counterplay to it, because unlike Blurred Frenzy or Pistol Whip that you see on Mesmer and Thief, which are kind of similar skills, it's not really easily available. Even if you dodge roll through it, the animation's probably still going and they're going to continue landing hits, while on those other two classes, all you have to do is move away. So their compromise was they got an evade. It seemed to make sense. It was like, don't use this powerful ability unless you are sure you're going to survive. It was a skill cap thing. Well, they've changed it. They just gave it an evade. So there you go. And they boosted its damage. In fact, Sword across the board, and you'll be seeing some fights in the background right now, has just had huge boosts. One of the skills has gone up by like 75% its flat damage. At that as well, the Shiro trait line once had an attack speed stacking buff that would increase your attack speed and then was kind of weird with the quickness from Impossible Odds. Well, now that actually just gives you a flat 2% extra damage as you attack, a lot like the Mesmer new sword trait, but I believe theirs is given ferocity, not just flat damage. So they're getting more modifiers thrown around. For Hammer on Jarlis, they did a couple of changes, like the skill 4 activates a little bit quicker now, and specifically the trait line itself. I found when I was in the beta, eventually I would trait Jarlis, I would specialize Jarlis, and I would take the Grandmaster that summoned those hammers that would spin around you when you took damage. Why? Because they did a lot of damage, and when you used them against, say, Pocket Raptors, you would cleave through the Pocket Raptors really fast and get tons of experience and bonus experience. It was really good for the Masteries. But they did say, you know, this is supposed to be the tanky brawler line, and people were taking this for like a big DPS thing, so they've changed it. The hammers still summon. Functionally, the trait still does the same thing. You take damage and it summons these hammers that spin around you. The hammers now do 75% less damage. However, while you have these hammers up, either these ones or the ones just from the Jarlis skill itself, you take 20% reduced flat damage and 20% reduced condition damage, and every time one of the hammers strikes, you are healed for a certain amount. So this is definitely the kind of thing I was looking for in that tanky playstyle you would expect from Jarlis. There's tons of tanky stuff, actually, especially on the Herald as well, which we'll get into in a second. Loads of it, and I can't help but wonder, why are they going so heavy on the tanking angle? Is this Conquest / Stronghold motivated, or is this PvE motivated? It certainly seems, if the content is built in PvE to require you to have to absorb a lot of damage and take a lot of focus, actually, it looks really fun to play a Revenant, Jarlis, or Herald tank from my perspective here. A couple of other changes. Staff. If you guys have ever played League of Legends, Jax, I used to main Jax in League of Legends. He's got an ability where he dodges for a while, and if anyone attacks him during that time, he can counter by stunning everyone around him. Staff kind of has that now, so they changed the skill 2, which felt just lame. Now it does weakness on the initial strike, and if you hit someone who's using an ability, then you get that AoE daze, so... Also, the skill 2 that zooms you across the area, and all those kind of mist-inspired skills, the one on the hammer as well, they all evade. It's not just the sword one. Looking at Venturi, you know how most, or a good deal of the Venturi traits were all like, hey, you get increased outgoing healing to your allies, you get increased outgoing healing to your allies. You know, all of those? For the beta weekend event that we just had, and the previous time we could play Revenant, these did not work. You hear me right, they didn't work at all. So when people were saying, oh, you know, Venturi's kind of sucks because A, there's not much of a place for healing support, and B, when you even try and do healing support, it's not even that good at it, it's because half of their traits weren't even working. So now that's fixed, and hopefully, you know, that's like a 60 to 80% increase in the amount of healing you can do to other people. Hopefully now that will feel like a satisfying style of gameplay, even again, if it's not really being called for with current content forms. There's been a lot of other little changes. There'll be a link in the description to the full post. Another big one was Shiro. You can now blink from 1200 range away like Infiltrator's Signet on the Thief, which a lot of people wanted. Just generally good stuff. All right, let's look at Underwater. And you're going to hate me, but I'm not going to talk about Underwater for very long. Just check out the footage that you can see in the background. This is them fighting as an Underwater Revenant. They said they were using both Shiro and Malix. You can see from the abilities that are basically the same as the terrestrial versions. They do kind of clarify that the skill 1 is an auto attack, which is a ranged auto attack, and the skill 2 is also an auto attack, but it's a melee auto attack. And they kind of show you how these work. I was actually kind of interested to see that the chain for the melee one, I believe this is anyway, blinks you in. So it's kind of that's a very unique thing, but obviously is only being seen underwater there, so I don't know how excited we can really be about that. But these are the skills. This is generally what it looks like to fight as a Revenant underwater. I don't want to linger on it too much. I want to talk about the elite specialization, and that would be the Herald. So yeah, this is about Glint. They didn't touch on the Glint lore so much as they touched on the Shiro lore. They did mention the video that we did over here again, which of course was fantastic to hear. But they did clarify a little on the name. I predicted on Monday that it would be called perhaps Oracle, because it would be inspired by Glint's ability to be prophetic and see the future. In fact, I made a comment on that video saying that I couldn't really think of many instances in Guild Wars as a franchise where prophecy has been a big thing. And actually somebody linked me to a huge long wiki page with loads of different instances, and all of them I recognize. It's just funny, I couldn't bring a single one of them to mind. I'm slipping here, guys. You can check that out if you like. But it seems like ArenaNet did the same thing as well when they were thinking of their name. They didn't go with Oracle, which Glint was explicitly called from time to time, which I think would have been a little bit better. But instead they went with Herald. The idea being the Herald is, you know, a harbinger of things to come. And actually, one thing I'm quite excited about, again, with the dialogue of these legends, is will Glint kind of predict, will she make silly little quips and things predicting how the fight might go and stuff like that? That'd be kind of interesting. I wonder whether we're actually going to get to communicate with her in a significant way in the story, or we're just going to hear about her maybe a little through Ritlock or something. I'm unsure. As to the point of the voice acting, well, you can listen here.
It has been too long. Allow me to act.
And so this was tweeted by ArenaNet before the stream. You can hear she does have a new voice actor, probably a good thing, though I would have liked to hear that it's the same voice actress. Let's be honest, she sounded a bit crazy and old and batty in the previous game, so she sounds more majestic and more fitting with what she's actually supposed to be as a character there. Alright, let's move on to the skills and the demonstrations. Roy did explain on the forums that this was all filmed with a Marauder amulet, so when we're looking at Shield has a heal on it, okay? And the heal wasn't really ticking for very much. Well, that's because it was a Marauder amulet. But yeah, let's have a look at it. I thought that this was going to be like the Tempest Fire Shout, where it cascades all around us in waves. It's not. It's much more like Phoenix. I love making my comparisons to the Elementalist. It's basically a supportive Phoenix. So Phoenix itself is a little supportive anyway because it grants vigor and it Condi cleanses. But this thing casts out wherever it likes. When it lands, instead of doing a big explosion of damage, it does an explosion of healing. And it applies protection. And then when it comes back to you, it applies protection again. I do like this because on paper, it sounded very similar to Guardian Shield. And we obviously don't want that. We want the classes to feel distinct. And when you see it actually in the game environment, you can see how different it really is. I actually think that that is a strength of Guild Wars 2, that to see skills written down on paper really only gives you such a small perspective on how they actually work. And maybe that's why these streams end up being so good, because they give us these whole new viewpoints. All right, the skill 5. Now, I've got to say, I'm not very happy with the skill 5. So it's as they described. You crouch behind your shield. You reduce all incoming damage to 0, so this isn't becoming invulnerable. This is like popping Endure Pain on yourself. Damage still comes in, Condis still get applied to you, it's just that they do 0 damage. At this time, you get regeneration, which helps to heal you up, and you get a break bar, which means the incoming CCs also will be shrugged off unless they manage to get the break bar all the way down, at which point you will be stunned and get 25 vulnerability. So it sounds like a cool skill. early in the week, I compared this a lot to invulnerable stuff, and this to me is not a very good skill compared to that stuff. The key thing you want to look at here on the skill tooltip is this prevents capture point contribution. So why is Endure Pain kind of balanced and different to classical invulnerabilities like Renewed Focus? Well, Endure Pain doesn't shrug off all damage. CCs can still come into you, Condies can still come into you, but it won't start neutralizing nodes for you in Conquest, or in even, well, this as well, if you like, or in various niche areas of PvE. And that was kind of the balance to it. So I was thinking with a Shield 5, alright, well, if this is functioning a bit more like Endure Pain, maybe that's the difference. Maybe we can continue to hold our nodes despite being very defensive, and this is kind of where the counterplay comes from. But no, this has all the downsides of being a full invulnerability without being a full invulnerability, and then further has an extra downside if they manage to get through the break bar, which in some of this combat footage played throughout the stream, we actually saw was done fairly easily. That already is very disappointing to me. To go even further, the duration is only 3 seconds. 3 seconds isn't very long to take advantage of this skill 5. Again, you can look at Obsidian Flesh, which has none of these downsides because it is a true invulnerability and lasts far longer. And if it wasn't weak for the Revenant itself, 3 seconds isn't necessarily a crazy amount of time for an opposing team to coordinate a burst through the break bar either. So it's not like we've got really interesting play with the Revenant or interesting counterplays being made by opposing teams frequently either. So that disappoints me, but maybe this skill could still be saved if it had like a really low cooldown. You know, maybe that's where the big benefit to it is. What if it was just a 15-second cooldown? Well, no, it is a 30-second cooldown with no option to further augment that. I believe if you trait Obsidian Flesh, which is a 4-second invulnerability, true invulnerability, which you can move during, which is 1 skill 5 when you still have 3 other skill 5s available to you, is only a 33-second cooldown. So this skill just doesn't look very fun to me. It doesn't seem to have a great place, and when you compare it to other classes as well, it doesn't seem too good either. I don't know, maybe you can say because it's seated on a heavy armor profession, a profession with higher base vitality at that. Maybe I'm not looking enough at the healing. Again, this is only a Marauder Amulet. If this scales really well with healing power, and this is kind of like a full heal on the skill 5, again, that could be its redemption. But I don't know, I'm just not that convinced. Maybe you guys can sell me on it. Let's move on to the glint abilities. First, the unique profession mechanic change. This is the facet of nature. It's this additional button you get on the UI above your legend swap you can see here. Actually, on the forums, it was explained that some of the UI is placeholder and this might change. But so yes, this is exactly as we heard before. It pulses 50% boon duration to you and your allies around you, and then that has great synergy with all the other boons you're getting from Glint if you were using her too. Then we hear more explicitly what the active does. What it does is it gives you all the boons that all the other facets would be giving you. So it will give you, if you pop this active, and you can be like Jarlis Shiro or Malik's Shiro and still have access to this. When you proc it, it will give swiftness to everyone, it will give might to everyone, it will give fury to everyone. So think about a thief using Thrill of the Crime with their F1. You know, it's very similar at this point. But then in addition to that as well, it gives you regen and it gives you protection. All of these boons, which then can be further augmented in a second with some of the traits. So that's the way that the mechanic works. Moving on to Glint's abilities herself, if you actually choose to slot this legend. She has the Hill, which is Facet of Light. This is passive regen, and the active is Defiant Stance from the warrior, basically. This I'm really excited to see, because again, with this tanky playstyle, think about all these things that are already there in the Jarlis line. Think about the shield and the innate defense that you're getting with that, and now think about the fact that at any moment when you're about to die, you can pop this heal. Think about some kind of big PvE encounter, hopefully, where there's a lot of incoming damage and you're trying to take that damage. You can pop this and then convert it all into healing. So all damage comes in, swaps to healing, and it will push you back up to 100% health. That's really great, and I think that's an excellent ability to see on the Herald. Next, we've got Facet of Darkness. This sounds like it would be a really dangerous move, right? Like, Facet of Darkness would be one of the OP DPS things. Oh no, this is actually very utility-based, I guess. The passive is Fury, so yeah, that's crazy great DPS. And actually has really good synergy as well with Invocation, which is your other kind of Revenant line that's not associated with a legend itself, but gives you a lot of benefits to Fury. Actually, one of those traits had an update too, which means that if you are a Revenant with this Invocation trait and you put Fury on yourself, instead of Fury giving you 20% crit chance, it gives you 40% crit chance. They made it a lot stronger. So, and then you can have Facet of Darkness to have basically perma Fury on yourself. So permanent 40% increased crit damage without any precision at all. That's really cool. But then the active, these tend to be the more exciting ones, is very utility based. Pulses blind out to everyone around you, it breaks stuns, And there is a trait that means when you break stun for yourself, you can break stun for all allies too. And then it is a reveal, so a bit more stealth counterplay. This is fantastic for me. And what this does is it will knock, and say there's a thief lining up a backstab or something near you, and you pop this, it will knock them out of stealth and reveal them for 5 seconds, which is a significant duration, and blind them while they're at it too. So not only is it revealing them, if they're like, damn, I'm revealed, I've got to go for it anyway, you're still going to blind that first Bassy Venom, and then maybe you can block the other one. I don't know if you get lucky enough. So that's a big utility-based one, and they just specifically on the stream said there's increasingly more stealth in the game. And I kind of see that after the specialization swap. There has been more stealth in the game. Especially, like, you look at some of the crazy Chronomancer combos where they can be stealth for, what is it, like 46 seconds or something at a time? Yes, but I also wonder whether this isn't so much a PvP-motivated comment. I hope it's a PvE-motivated comment. We know that they're trying to encourage us to use a lot more mechanics. That means I want to see more enemies blocking. That means I want to see more enemies applying boons to themselves so that I can strip them. That means I want to see more enemies stealthing, not just random little Skelk in the area that you don't need to apply reveal to, but significant stealths on opponents in PvE, so that these stealth counterplays, like the Dragon Hunter now has, like the Engineer now has, like the Revenant has, can, you know, see a little bit more use. You know, especially when we look at challenging content and setting up specific group comps that are supposed to have a lot of tools to tackle encounters. Currently, we think of very few things. We think of might and reflect and blocks and blinds and, you know, those standard fares. But we can increase that. If there's a lot of enemy stealthing, suddenly you might want to include an NG or a Revenant or a Herald into your comp, specifically because of their anti-stealth capabilities that other classes don't have. And the same for being unblockable and all those things. I think ArenaNet can really key into those. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. Let's move on to the next facet. That's the facet of elements. This is swiftness, we heard about before, and we actually got to see this ability in action. It breathes fire on an area. So it's an AoE that ticks 3 times, and each tick does damage and applies a condition, a different condition each time. So I believe they said the order was this. The first tick is chill, then the second tick is weakness, and then the third tick is burn. And I think it's a couple of stacks of burn as well. So this is great for some Condi extra stuff. Maybe you might see Malik's Heralds specifically so they can take advantage of this skill, maybe. But that's the way that this one works, and it's got a nice variety as well. You know, weakness is a good counter to damage coming in, chill is a good CC, and burn is good for your damage, so they got a good range there. Moving on is probably the most exciting one for the current state of PvE, and perhaps World versus World as well, to an extent. This is the facet of strength. So this passively puts out might, and it looks like, with no boon duration, it's about 6 stacks of might. So boon duration isn't so easy to build anymore. I've heard some really great suggestions from the community about combining healing power and boon duration together into a new stat that you just call compassion. And then if you want to build healing power, you also get boon duration at the same time. And this would have been one of those really fun skills because it's actually a boon that stacks intensity, right? So this would have been one of those fun skills to build boon duration with and see how high those passive, just permanent stacks can be. Can you get it to 9 stacks, 12 stacks permanently just around you as a Revenant? So obviously their competition in this area is Phalanx Strength Warriors, who just, without even trying, have 25 might rolling around. But, you know, it's a good start. The active as well is very powerful, and this is 20 vuln on an enemy. It does 2 like dragon slashes. First one's 10 vuln, second one's 10 vuln, and they just go bang bang. So it's 20 vuln, and then you could pop this, and then you could quickly swap to Shiro, give yourself Fury and all those extra buffs from many of your traits, and then spike them down with the new overpowered skill 3 plus impossible odds. You know, these are the kind of plays that you'll be able to make. Or it could be a team-wide thing where you drop those 20 vuln and someone else on your team spikes someone down. Alright, and then we've got the elite, last of all, the facet of chaos. Passively protection, very, very powerful boon. And the active is pretty much as I speculated it would be on Monday. It's a big blowout in like a cone in front of you. Also, though, has high flat damage on it and applies super speed to your allies at the same time. And there's plenty of use of this being demonstrated in some of the fights around the Heart of the Mists in the footage. So there you go, guys. That's the facets. Facets were probably, of all the elite specializations so far, the easiest utility skills to sort of go over. You know, it's like, here's the passive, the active's this thing. Passive, active's this thing. There's also very few traits that directly augment the glint skills. Speaking of traits, let's have a look at them now. I'll go over the minors first. First minor, as always, is really a non-minor. It just says, hey, you can now equip the shield. You can use your new stuff. The second minor is called Vigorous Persistence, which means that while you've got an upkeep, and obviously Glint has tons of upkeeps, you just get a flat 25% increased endurance gain. And what's important to note about this is it doesn't have to be a Glint upkeep. you could be Herald specialized, but use Malik's Shiro, and then get more endurance while you are using the Malik's upkeep, for example. It doesn't have to be one of the Glint ones. But of course, you've always got a Glint upkeep available if you're Herald specialized in that new F2 button. And then lastly, just because it's on theme, not too exciting, the third minor is increased boon duration by 15%, a lot like Arcane Elementalists get. Moving on to the main ones we're going to be choosing. Competition for the Adept slot is between give yourself super speed on stun break, and I'll talk about synergy for that in just a second with another trait. Or we've got place infuse light on an ally when you revive them. This one is probably the biggest game changer I see in the entire Herald, right? For PvP, this is massive. And even, again, maybe PvE too, at certain places, depends on the content. But so, Infuse Light is your heal skill, which inverts incoming damage to healing. So yeah, when you press F to revive someone, when you have this trait, it's not like you revive 10% faster like a lot of us get. Instead, this is, let's say you're in PvE, right? Someone goes down state and they're cleaving the hell out of that body. They are unloading tons of damage on it to try and push him down. The Herald runs over, taps F, and all of that cleave that the opposing team is putting out suddenly is healing the body. But what's more incredible then is that the enemy team that was cleaving can see this and have the skill to stop cleaving and, you know, kind of back up. And so there is this great initial counterplay from the Revenant, and then next counterplay from the team that was actually cleaving the body, waiting for Infused Light to run out. That is the kind of gameplay that is really going to improve PvP and introduce a lot of cool dynamics. So I was super happy to hear about this one. Plus, it's just very strong. Next, we've got the third one that you could choose is gain toughness for all your upkeeps. And what this technically is every single bit of energy degeneration you have on yourself from upkeeping, you will give you plus 40 toughness, and you can have minus 10. So in theory, this is plus 400 toughness for proccing all of your upkeeps at once. But the thing is that this is then going to drain your energy massively. I think if anything, this is a bit undertuned. Plus 400 toughness for blowing all your energy is really not much at all. Like, at all. I think it needs to be, like, doubled, honestly. And that may sound crazy, but even 800 toughness for having all your upkeeps up for a tiny window of time is still not that great. But at least with 800 toughness, you can really start to feel the difference. Anyway, yeah, again, that's all upkeeps, not just glints. So, moving on, you've got the Master selection. And you've got Bolster Fortifications, which is give yourself protection and all your allies protection when you pop a heal skill. And that the duration on the protection is really short, but remember the Revenant at any time has 2 heal skills available to them by legend swapping. So there's a bit of play there, not too exciting to me. Next is another big one for PvE, Shared Empowerment. When you apply a boon, so don't forget your upkeeps are always constantly passing boons out, you also apply might to whoever got that boon, including yourself. So now think about the facet of strength and think about how it was like 6 might just all the time. If you took this trait, it's compounding that effect. And I suppose this is kind of the Herald's equivalent to Phalanx or whatever. So yeah, again, there could be some really cool kind of boon duration-y style things if they bring that mechanic back into the game at some point. But this is really going to help Revenant, along with like their passive ferocity buff for everyone, help them secure a place in current content streams in the game. And then lastly, we've got when you stun break, you also stun break allies. So we saw a little bit of this on the Tempest. We've seen a little bit of this on, say, Guardian with their Virtues. We see this here on the Revenant too, except this is really strong because it's every stun break you have. So now also think as well about the Adept, which is gain super speed on a stun break. Does this mean then, say your team you're idiots and you're in Conquest and you're all stood next to each other for whatever reason, and someone comes in and lands a nasty Earthshaker, the Herald can then say pop Facet of Darkness, stun break everyone, and then does he also give everyone super speed and you just kind of fly off as a group and go crazy? I wonder whether that synergy does actually work. Alright, let's look finally at the Grandmasters. Remember how the Grandmaster Minor was basically the same as Arcane Elementalists? It just gave you more boon duration. Well, they have one to choose as well that's very similar to 2% more damage for every boon on you. Now that's great. The problem is that all the boons that the Revenant currently puts out are already boons that are in high abundance. We already see, for example, a lot of swiftness, we see a lot of might, we see a lot of fury, we see a lot of regeneration. So what really would have made this shine is if Revenant was pulsing out a lot of those rarer boons, and then it kind of gets more benefit from this Grandmaster, because other people are probably putting them on them anyway. As it stands, it's not the greatest damage modifier, but it is a damage modifier. And then the next Grandmaster is a pretty interesting one. Remember the skill 5 from the shield that I said I didn't really like very much? Well, you can passively proc this when you get low on health. ArenaNet do love these traits. I don't like these traits at all. I would much prefer them if it was when you get low on health, when you hit below 25% health, you have the option of pressing spacebar or whatever bind you like to then activate the ability, just so that it's not a passive thing that saves people's lives when they've made a bad play and you've tried so hard to spike them down. Whatever, so this is interesting because it actually roots you as well. So this is an example of a skill that's passively going to activate, and let's say you're in the middle of a dodge roll when it procs, you're going to get knocked out of that dodge roll and then immediately, like, shield yourself, even when you don't have the shield set out. So I wonder what that looks like when you're, say, on sword, and then you suddenly crouch down. That's kind of interesting. But yeah, it also has an additional effect to it, though. It's not just this passive thing. It also has the additional effect that whenever you use a shield skill, your boons on you and the boons of the allies around you are increased by a flat 2 seconds. Again, it's basically the same as one of the Tempest Warhorn skills. So this just pulses out your boons for a little bit longer as well while using shield, and that gives it benefit even without you having to get low on health and have this kind of almost random arbitrary proc thing. Alright, and lastly we've got for the final Grandmaster, when you get stability, they describe this as the opposite to the Shiro Grandmaster, which is you strip 2 stability at once. This is gain 2 stability at once, so whenever you would apply stability to yourself, you get an extra stack. And you can think about like the dodge roll trait, where you dodge and you get 2 stacks. There was a nerf to one of the other stability skills that Revenant had, but when you take this trait, I guess it probably evens out a little. And there you go. That's the Herald, guys. That's the way that it works. I'm very excited mostly about its tanking capabilities, but until we hear about the challenging content, which is upcoming, for PvE, I'm not so sure about it. Last thing, they did end the stream off. I was going to talk about this a while ago. They did talk about how on the Wiki, some of you guys, a lot of people in this community are misinformed, and you think that the Wiki is just written in purely by devs, and it's just, you know, if it's on the Wiki, it's absolutely correct and it's canon, and, you know, this is the irrefutable source of all information. It's not. It's maintained by community members, and you yourself listening right now can help them out, and indeed, the more people that help out, the better. I did a video recently talking about the Guild Wars 1 betas, and a bunch of people sent in cool screenshots to me of the betas that were just nowhere to be found on the internet, and this stuff would be lost. And someone did actually message me saying, you know, this stuff's really easy to submit now. So there's a new feature on the Wiki where if you have any information like screenshots and stuff like that, you can really easily contribute. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in that portion of the stream, guys, because I do think it's important. The more we get out there, the better, basically. But there you go, guys. That's the Revenant. That's the Herald. Awful lot to talk about today. If you made it to the end of the video, I know it's been quite a long one. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed, and I guess I will see you next time.